What do you call a room blade entering the highway? A deadwood merge. Fresh it buds now.
Fresh and
All right, folks, welcome back to yet another episode of Fresh and Buds. I'm your host, Tommy Fresh, and you are all my buds. And today we are joined by the legendary Charles Dunn, U.S. national champ, calling champ, among many other things. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing just great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a long time coming. You've been, involved in this space for quite some time. I mean, I remember basically just there was like these rumors of these two players, Pat Eschke and Charles Dunn, that just played Fatigue all the time, and then all of a sudden, you really popped onto the scene, and you're obviously a great dude and a great player as well. So happy to connect with you in Tampa and get you on the pod. Now we gotta get to know you, right? You're the first time on the show. Got to get to know Charles. Yeah, as I said, you've won multiple tournaments. You've been playing a long time. But when did it all start, Charles, for you in Flesh and Blood? Or card games in general?
Yeah, well, at least in Flesh and Blood, you mentioned it earlier, my buddy Pat Eschke, best friend. I've known him for many, many years. We used to play all kinds of card games together and board games and whatnot. And, it was during the pandemic time. We used to play a bunch of old like Magic or other card games or whatever. I kind of got out of that as pandemic kind of shut everything down. And one day Pat's like, "Hey Charles, I got this new card game. They're having a big tournament. It's called Flesh and Blood." He's like, "You should learn it." And they were having a big tournament at the time I was living in Pittsburgh and I was in Cincinnati, so it's not too far away. And I'm like, you know what? I got to get out of the house. I got to go do something. Sure, I'll do it. And I literally traveled to the Calling in Cincinnati. It was my first time I even touched physical Flesh and Blood cards, and bam, I'm playing in a Calling. So a little crazy. It didn't do too hot. Obviously, I went 4-4, which was honestly better than I expected, right? But no, I got instantly hooked on the game. It felt so deep. It felt like every game that I was playing was just all my choices mattered, and I felt like, coming from other games, I didn't feel like I played any non-games. So. It was just really engaging and exactly what I wanted out of a card game. And they're having massive tournaments at a time when nobody else was. So for all those reasons, I just got right into it and never looked back.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, that Calling Cincinnati was Tales of Aria Limited.
Yeah.
So were you a big limited player in other games? Was that something that kind of appealed to you? Because you've had a lot of success in Constructed as well. How do you feel about the two different kinds of formats?
Yeah, I think if I had to classify myself, I think I would classify as a constructed player more than limited. I do limited in order to play constructed, I guess, as it were. I definitely know people who love draft, and I do too. I think it's enjoyable, but what really gets me excited to play is constructed tournaments, honestly. Nothing against limited. I like being able to walk into a tournament and know that, yes, I have the best deck, or at least what I think is the best deck, right? And then limited, leaves a little bit up to chance and whatnot. And I like being prepared for those kind of things.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of wrenches that can be thrown your way, or good things as well. You can open up the nuts, right? Like that can totally happen. But it's nice to have a plan, especially when you put so much work into it, and then you can practice draft and all that and really have a great plan as well. But, I'm sure things can
Nothing against the skill expression in draft. Of course, there's tons of that, and being prepared is important. But I don't know. I lean towards constructed if I had to pick one for sure.
Yeah. And Flesh and Blood has some of the best constructed play, by a wide margin compared to the limited, I think. But, they're getting a lot better. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you've been known as your kind of methodical play, right? These fatigue strategies, Oldham, and then you won Nats on Briar, but it was not your typical Briar. It was this fatigue control Briar that had become popular at the time. and sent Briar to Living Legend, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, that was the one that sent her over the finish line.
Yeah. And it wasn't even with Rosetta Thorn, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, everyone played Rosetta Thorn for like 998 of the points, and they couldn't get the job done, so I had to bust out Reaping Blade and show them how to do it. Actually,
Yeah, which is so sick. But I gotta know. Have you always been into the tanky side of gaming? I mean, we talked a little bit before we started recording. You play World of Warcraft. There's tanky characters there. Is that something that's across the board for you, or is that just, Flesh and Blood specific?
A bit, I guess. I guess a little bit. I do play a DPS in World of Warcraft, but I've dabbled in tanks, so I had to pick another role. And in like some games like Overwatch, like team shooter kind of things, I tend to play tanks. So yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think I find a lot of value in just being able to, well, at least in other games, right? Just go into the fray, just get into the action, be there. Like that's where you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be hiding or running away. You're supposed to like get in there, and that's what I enjoy about it. So yeah, I guess it spills over a little bit into Flesh and Blood.
Yeah. Now, what about these strategies in Flesh and Blood that that have made you kind of really gravitate towards them? I know that in Amsterdam, you played Bravo.
Yeah, I played Bravo on the Pro Tour.
Tour, and then took Zen to the Calling. Obviously, that's a big left turn, but it was the best deck, so totally understandable.
Yeah, so on that point in particular, I do think so. Pat and I both played Bravo in the Pro Tour, and most of our other teammates did, or I don't think any of our other teammates played Bravo. But they did. They knew we were gonna play it, and they didn't like tell us no. They're just like, hey, that's an attempt or an approach to the metagame that is interesting and might work out, but it might not. And that's kind of what we knew. We knew we were taking a gamble. We were hoping to run into a bunch of Zens, a bunch of Azaleas, and a bunch of News. We actually had a Bravo build that we thought was quite good into New. And then turns out we just didn't actually play those matchups. We played a bit wider for spread. We played some Victors, some KOs, which our version of Bravo was not good into, and both of us kind of bombed out. But if our matchup spread had been different, maybe we make a similar kind of run that like the Azuri that won the whole event did, right? They kind of targeted a very specific metagame and got rewarded for it. We tried to target the same way, didn't get rewarded.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because Flesh and Blood is a notoriously low variance game, but the variance does come into your matchups and what you run into with Gem. So seeing that happen, but I gotta know, like, even Amsterdam, this Zen meta, you chose Bravo, you've won with you've won with the Control Briar, you've made the finals of Callings with Oldham. What is it about those kinds of decks in Flesh and Blood that's like, I want to play these?
Yeah, you kind of alluded to it a bit earlier about the low variance part of the decks, and I find that, certainly compared to other card games, Flesh and Blood has lower variance, and that's part of what I love about it. And what I think a lot of us love about it is you really get to feel that agency in the game. And when you're playing a fatigue deck or a defensive style of deck, what it ultimately means is that the game's going to go a lot longer. It's not going to be over in 3 or 4 turns, because you could just block out, right? And that just like lends itself to like the better player winning more often, I find, right? If you go a 20 turn game, that means I have 20 turns to like eke out a point of advantage here and there over 20 turns, and that adds up. Whereas if I eke out 1 or 2 points, per turn over a 4 turn game, right? Maybe that's not enough. Maybe that's not good enough. But I do find like the longer the game goes, generally the better player tends to win. And, not to toot my own horn, I think I'm better than your average player. So it turned out that kind of strategy led to just a higher win rate for me. And so I gravitated to it because I like winning.
Yeah, all right. Now, I mean, do you also, outside of winning, obviously, that's a pretty cool thing to like doing. It's pretty nice. Do you enjoy kind of sitting back and like experiencing all those turns? Because like over the course of a whole tournament, that's a lot more game time than other people.
It's funny. What I always say when this comes up is like, hey, I came here to play Flesh and Blood, and by God, I'm going to play as much Flesh and Blood as possible, right? I'm going to take all the time in the round. I'm going to play every round up to and including the finals. I'm just going to get my money's worth and play the most Flesh and Blood possible. You know, it's kind of the opposite of like golf, right? You're playing a round of golf, and your goal is to play the least amount of golf possible. That just seems so backwards to me. I want to play the most Flesh and Blood possible when I go to an event.
Well, I can say that when I go golfing, I play the most possible golf that I can play. But
Sure.
now, what do you do to kind of like approach those tournaments and knowing that you're going to play as much Flesh and Blood as you want, which is great. But how do you get that mental fortitude? Is there anything that you do or practice, or is this just something that you've always kind of had?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like good habits that as I've played tournaments in cards like for a lot of my life, and you just kind of get into it, right? Get a good night's sleep, drink lots of water, have some snacks on you, like things that your mom would tell you to go do, right? To be healthy. And I really do find every tournament I go with a big water bottle, get a good night's sleep, have the snacks. And then just having a reasonable mental game, right? You finish the round and you put it behind you, right? You don't let it tilt you. You can't go back in time. You try not to get upset about it. I know it's easier said than done, of course, but like, it's just practice, and it's just kind of making sure you get in the right headspace. And then I find that all those taken together help, make those long days not feel quite as long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, it's very impressive, I will say, because I think any average player would say, I played X deck that is a control deck all day. I can not even think after the third round. So it is impressive that you could do that and then have results. So it's very impressive. Now, before we get to some more Fab, you are a game designer outside of Fab. You have some game design. You do it right now. You have some in your portfolio. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I work on Diablo 4. I'm a game designer for Blizzard. I work on like the live design of the game, so a lot of like the live balance, changing like balance tuning on things, and also making new content. So when new seasons of Diablo come out and there's new like legendary items or powers or effects or whatever, I probably have a hand in a lot of that kind of stuff too. I really enjoy it. It's my absolute dream job. Totally love what I do. And I think it's just like a dream come true to be able to actually make a living playing games, and then be able to play games in my spare time with Flesh and Blood and others.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. Now, it's cool to kind of be able to talk to a game designer on that side of things, right? We've had Gottlieb on the show, and many others that are involved with game design, in the card game space. Now, you coming from that side of the world, do you find that it gives you a unique perspective with Flesh and Blood and in how you evaluate cards, and or even just like evaluate, like, is this a good design, because there's
a little bit.
there's like a lot going on in Flesh and Blood.
For sure, for sure. I definitely often evaluate cards through a lens that I think is different from a lot of people, right? I look at it like, hey, what is this when things are good design, bad design, or like um just kind of like where it fits into the idea of like, hey, what does this tell me about the developer's intention for a hero or a class or whatever? Like, when you see a card from Rosetta, like I don't know, just like or any of the heroes, honestly, just like the decompose mechanic, right? Like, what does that tell you about like how they intend the games to play out? And like thinking about it that way, because oftentimes the devs like have a pretty good idea, like especially early on in the format when you're trying to evaluate, like trying to get in the mind of the developer, I think kind of gets you a step or two ahead, right? They don't know everything, but like they know a lot more than we do at this point in a new format. So just trying to really get in their heads and like kind of reverse engineer that from like what I would do as a designer, I think helps in evaluating new cards and new formats.
Yeah, and I mean, what would you give LSS a grade in how well they design cards?
I think they've been like steadily improving just constantly, right? I think every set has been better than the last, and that's nothing against the old sets. Like I love some of the old ones, but like I thought, hey, Heavy Hitters, greatest set in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mistvale comes out, greatest set, right? And then now Rosetta, and I'm like, hey, it's has all the makings of being, just as good as Mistvale, if not better. So I've been very impressed with them stepping up their game, making new and interesting styles, right? Like the Flesh and Blood rule set is comparatively, I'll say, like a little bit restricted, right? That you don't have quite as much avenues to make diverse cards as you have in some other games, because you kind of have like that same baseline level of value that each card kind of needs to represent. But I've been very impressed with their ability to make very diverse feeling games. Like the games just play out very differently over the years with the different sets and cards. So lots of props to the developers on that front.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now let's put that to the test. Now I'm going to ask you some of your favorite cards in the game. This could be, this however you want to evaluate it. If it's your favorite because it looks cool, if it's your favorite because it's designed well, or it's your favorite because it's overpowered, doesn't matter here.
Sure.
Charles Dunn, who's your favorite hero?
Briar.
Okay.
I think yeah, Briar. Like I love Guardians, right? But Briar obviously has like my most sentimental win, winning U.S. Nationals with her. But also just like the pure flexibility in it, right? Everyone was all about the lightning style and the aggro style, but like that was only half of her ability, and the fact that there was the other half about the embodiment of Earth, just I find the hero to be like really just a complete package. And I also at the world premiere this past weekend, I managed to pick up a Marvel version of the adult Briar. There's only a few open, but I managed to find one of them, get it, and so that's really awesome.
Yeah, those looked great too. You didn't happen to get a Rosetta Thorn, did you?
Oh, trust me, I would have probably I probably would have shelled out quite a bit to grab that Marvel Rosetta Thorn, but also I would have loved a Marvel Reaping Blade. Maybe that's a few sets off.
I think it's coming. That would be a cool like winner's perk kind of thing. Like, oh, you won with a deck. What card would you like to see in like a special treatment? You would like Reaping Blade, of course.
Of course.
Weapon, is that your favorite weapon? Reaping Blade?
I don't think so. Reaping Blade was like, it did its job, right? It was literally just like a 1-for-3. Its life gain was not really that relevant. It was relatively boring, and like a lot of other things could have fit in there. I think if I have to pick my favorite weapon, it's actually like a 2-for-1. It's Hatchet of Body and Hatchet of Mind. Which I feel like kind of fits, the idea, right? It's not one weapon, but fair enough. Yeah, I love the hatchets. They served me really well in that Nationals run. Actually, I played Bolton in both drafts because it was Monarch. And then at Pro Tour Los Angeles earlier this year, I played Hatchets Dorinthia. I just love the value of it, right? You just get 2 resources for 5, assuming you can get Go Again. Provides a little bit of a deck building puzzle. How do you get Go Again? How do you like combo them together? And I loved it with Dorinthia because, right, you could swing the hatchet a 3rd time, and that was always really cool because of her hero power. So a lot of flexibility in that, and I just had a lot of fun playing with hatchets. I love just chopping people up with them.
I'm gonna have to look back, but you might be the first person to answer the hatchets. We get a lot of Dawn Blades here and there, Raiden for sure, but yeah, the hatchets are sweet. I mean, I have always said that the meta's the best when you can play the hatchets. I think, like, just the numbers game, and it's a cool numbers game. It's not like it's not boring. You got the boots too. Oh god.
Yeah. Love grinding them out, and just having basically, especially when you played with Dorinthia, basically everything had it on hit, right? Everything had on hit, swing again. So it sounds like just a number game, but it had some on hit effects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, what's your favorite equipment?
Ooh, I think my favorite equipment is probably Shock Charmers. I love the art on it first and foremost, but also just kind of going back to my talk about Briars, like the flexibility of it. I originally tried to make Shock Charmers work in like an Ice Lexi deck, where you would try to like pump cards into shock charmers to like give them extra frostbites or something on some of our frost arrows. That was not a good deck, so don't try that. I tried it though. It didn't work out, but I remember that, and I just like got to thinking about like, hey, how can I use this card in weird ways? And then it also spell void too, right? Which at a pro tour when I played Starvo, we had that in our list to counter Kanos. So he played a Kano. Hey, we got spell void too. It's great. So he's just really flexible card, beautiful art, lots of different ways you can play it. And it's from the first set I really started playing him with Tales of Aria. So that's why it's my favorite.
Very, very cool. And it might be playable again now that we have two
Maybe.
new Lightning heroes.
Of course. Yeah, looking forward to it.
And then what's your favorite card you throw in your deck? You know, any of the non-attack actions, attack actions, D-reacts, etc.
Yeah. Sigil of Solace. I love me some Sigil of Solace, right? It is what it is. It gains you 3 life. It's so funny because coming from like any other card game or any other thing, you know, somebody could just look at this card and be like, oh, this card just says gain 3 life. Like that's probably terrible, right? A lot of other games like gain 3 life for a whole card, not at all worth it. But the fact that it just like makes sure that you always kind of get your value. The number of times I've like had Sigil of Solace and my opponent has like overblocked my Command and Conquer because they just thought it was a pummel, right? It's just like it's like pretending to be a pummel is very high. So I just love the aspect of it, right? I can like take it, put it in an arsenal, and they're like, aha, I'll attack you with a Command and Conquer. And you're just like, play Sigil.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Right. So it's and also we got the promo from Worlds last year, the Sagrada Familia Sigil of Solace, absolutely beautiful. So all that reason, that's why it's my favorite.
It's iconic too. I mean, it's just from Welcome to Wraith, right? Yeah, it's Welcome to Wraith. Yeah, it's a banger. Now, one last question here: if you were a hero in Wraith, what class and talent would you be?
I think I don't know that I have the large burly muscles to be a big guardian or anything. Not that I, or a warrior. I don't think I'd want to get directly in melee combat. So okay. I think I'd lead towards a wizard. Casting some spells, reading some books. I think it'd be an earth wizard actually. They look like I think that would be right up my alley.
Are you looking at any earth wizards from the new set and liking them?
Oh, funny you mention that. Verdance is looking like a pretty good hero. not to belie my my intentions, but I do think that all 4 of the new heroes have a lot of promise, but Verdance has a ton of power. So looking forward to trying her out.
Yeah, she was very interesting to play this weekend, and we'll get right into it now. I mean, we both just got back from Tampa a couple days ago. World premiere, ton of limited playing, packs were opened, Earth cards were decomposed, Lightning cards were played at instant speed, and your teammate took down the calling, which was pretty exciting as well. How was your weekend and your experience with Rosetta in the limited sphere?
Yeah, it was a really fun weekend, right? Like just being able to sit down and like crack a pack and be like, I have literally never seen this card. Yeah. And then the person across from me is just like, oh, I got a Majestic. And we just everyone at the table just like leans over and read it because no one in the world outside of the dev team has ever seen the card that was just open. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that was just a very memorable experience and it was really awesome. So like nothing can replace that, right? If you get a chance to play in a world premiere, absolutely do it. Just it's a one of a kind experience for sure. In terms of the actual games, I played in the calling, just went 4 and 3, so I did not make day 2. I played Florian in the calling. So did a lot of people. Florian, I think, was the most popular deck being played. At the time I thought, oh, this is a fine Florian deck. It's got some decompose, it's got some red cards, and it's fine. And then I kind of looked at some other people's Florian's deck, and I'm like, oh, mine actually wasn't that good. Like, I didn't have too much of the rune chant generation. I didn't have any of the D reacts, which really help with the decompose. I didn't have some of the other rares and even some of the red commons that were just kind of important to really make the deck, get to that next level. Didn't have those, so just kind of had a middling result and didn't make day two. But had a ton of fun playing a lot of games with it.
Yeah, it's the Florian decks were. I mean, there were plenty. There were plenty. I went Aurora in the calling. Started 3-0 and then lost 3 in a row. Awesome, love it. Yeah, and but it was kind of interesting. Like, I played in the world premiere and then another event later that day on Friday, and the calling and the battle hardened. But the first 3 events, my lightning pool was like just all I really had, right? Like 3 red earth cards, and you're just like, well, all right, well, I mean that just kind of seals the deal, and it made me worried because other people were saying, well, Verdance and Florian are so cracked, but did you find them to be too good outside of the Lightning Heroes? Do you think, because we saw more Lightning Heroes be played in the draft portion on day 2 of the calling, but in sealed, because there is another sealed calling this weekend down in Sydney. Is it too much, the Earth in the sealed format, or it just is the easy one to figure out?
I think it's a little both. I think it is easier to figure out, but also, like, there's just when it's sealed, you just don't have quite as many options, or you kind of have to play what your pool gives you. And I do think the kind of barrier to entry for like what makes a reasonable Earth deck, it requires a lot less, right? All of your Earth cards can be decomposed, and as long as you have like 4 to 5-ish cards that say decompose on it, you can make your deck work. On the flip side, I think a lot of the Lightning Heroes need kind of a very specific combination of cards, and they're the ones that are kind of most hurt by having to play yellows or blues where they'd rather have reds, right? So if you've got a lot of red Lightning cards, great, play Lightning Hero. But if you have a lot of like yellow Lightning cards, it's like it feels so much worse because you're just like -1 point. But if you're doing that with the Earth Heroes, at least it's still an Earth card, or at least it still gets you to decompose. So it still does something to further your game plan, even if it is kind of 1 less point. So
yeah.
I do think, I just ultimately think sealed is a little biased towards Earth.
Yeah, it certainly is. But the Lightning Heroes were pretty interesting, and I think the big question here, the question mark of the weekend, and probably until we start seeing some CC decks and some CC tournaments, is Acilio. And I mean, I got to ask you, what are your thoughts on this weird hero? Like, it's so strange.
Yeah. So Acilio was actually the hero I played in the world premiere, right? Opening those first handful of packs, and I'm like, hey, I've got like 3 or 4 lightning sigils, and I've got a bunch of like the red burn spells, the 0 for 3s. And my lightning pool, and I looked at my Earth cards, and I'm like, oh, there's only 2 decompose cards, so I guess I can't play that, right? And so I ended up playing Acilio, and went 3-1 with him. I kind of, it was really pretty cool because a lot of people were like, I have no idea how to build Acilio, and then I said, hey, I've got this pretty decent looking Acilio deck, and everyone wanted to see it, right? Everyone wanted to know, like, what is it? What does he do? And I actually think he has a really cool play pattern, right? You're playing some lightning attacks, and then you're trying to use that to amp with Volzar, your weapon, and then you play an arcane spell to kind of finish your turn, right? That's your end of your chain link, which is very different than what we've really ever seen in a lot of other classes. So really interesting play pattern there, and I think porting him to Classic Constructed is going to be really interesting. I think he's got a lot of power. If you can set up his combos and kind of like do his thing, it can be really, really potent. But he does probably have to play a lot of instants or auras or cards that don't block, and so he might be very susceptible to disruption as well.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see. he's weird, and you know, kind of going back to, you know, the way you evaluate Flesh and Blood cards. You know,
Mhm.
you kind of look at these cards and you say, what is the intention here from the devs? Acilio is one of those heroes.
Yeah.
You're like the hero abilities. I mean, it doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah.
It's just a filtering mechanic.
Yeah, I actually remember well, two parts of that. One, whenever we were still in spoiler season, you know, some of my locals are really big Kano players. And so they oh, I want to see the new wizard, right? And then they saw Acilio. They saw his weapon. And they're like, I know this hero. I know his weapon. Oh, and then we got a specialization, the sigil
Mhm.
that draws a card. And he's like, I've seen the hero, I've seen the weapon, I've seen the specialization. I have no idea what this hero does. Right? Like, that's so crazy that you can know all that stuff and still not really get a complete picture of it until, you know, really the full set came out and we kind of crystallized, like, hey, this is the play pattern that we're expecting out of it. So that was really cool. And then, right, his hero power, I think there's a few different ways you can use it, right? Initial theory crafting had some people thinking, oh, I'm going to like turbo through my deck, right? I get to basically see 5 cards or 6 cards each turn cycle because you can discard on your turn and your opponent's turn. And then you can, like, you know, turbo your way to some combo. And then you do a combo and win. I don't know that that's really going to happen, or at least not given the current card pool. I don't know. Somebody might prove me wrong. But I'm not immediately seeing it. I'm actually seeing it more as like a, hey, you've got to play a lot of these sigils to make them work. You got to play a lot of instants like Lightning wants to do, and so it's kind of just like a fail safe. It's like, hey, what if you actually need to block and you have 4 instants in your hand? You know, you can cash one in and maybe draw yourself out of it. I think that's where it's most obviously useful
Hmm.
currently. But it does have that design space in the future. Like, hey, maybe there's you know, something that says when you discard this, gain some benefit, and then suddenly it's really good with Acilio.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I don't know. I've been seeing some decks out there, and they're so cool. But yeah, Ocilio is the weirdest thing to come out of the set. Now,
For sure.
Verdance, you mentioned that you think that she's going to be a little bit of a contender here.
Yeah, I hope so. I think she might also be a little hard to figure out, similar to how Icelander was when, you know, the last time we got a wizard, right? It was like, hey, it took people a while to really get on board with like what she's trying to do. We might see the same thing again with Verdance. Not sure. Um, but just life gain as a concept is so powerful in Flesh and Blood, way more than it might seem, because, you know, kind of what I was talking about with Sigil of Solace earlier is, you know, you can just always get your value off your cards. If you have life gain cards, it's so important whenever your opponent stumbles, right? You know, they have a bad hand, they draw reds, you know, maybe they, you know, don't take a very efficient turn. If you can just take that opportunity to gain life, which Verdance is going to want to do, that really just like pulls you very far ahead.
Hmm.
And so I think it's going to be really punishing to decks that aren't prepared to deal with her, aren't prepared to deal with that life gain or that kind of defensive game plan, or just aren't as efficient on offense.
Yeah, she's going to be an interesting kind of piece to the puzzle that's going
Mm-hmm.
to be this post Rosetta, or I guess Rosetta release meta, because we also saw a huge ban happen last week after I
Yeah.
recorded last week's episode, which I just loved. They dropped it afterwards. That's awesome. Everybody listened to all this stuff that is actually, it was a lore episode anyway. It didn't matter. So,
Sure.
but it without these insane cards, these draw cards, no more Art of War. I played against a couple Zens already on Talishar. I'm like, well, this feels like a normal deck again. And
Yeah.
you know, what's your thought on those bans and how it's going to affect everything?
Yeah, I love, first off, huge props to the developers and designers for really laying out their philosophy on like why they're doing this, right? Like they really wanted to, they really knew it was going to be a contentious change, and they really got ahead of it, right? They said, hey, people are going to be upset if we just drop this list and don't say anything. So they, not only did they like write something, they wrote a lot.
Yeah.
um and they went in depth, and you know, whether you agree or disagree with like their result, like, you can at least follow the chain of logic. And I think because of that, you know, it's been generally widely received as like a positive, because of the vision that, you know, James White and the rest of LSS has laid out. for how they want games of Flesh and Blood to be played, I think is the most fun way to play Flesh and Blood. And cards like Art of War and the Tomes and Bonds of Ancestry were pushing that a little too far away from what the original vision of Flesh and Blood was, and into being this more combo, one big turn, and that's all that matters kind of thing. And I agree. I think that was less enjoyable Flesh and Blood than the kind of more consistent back and forth that we're going to see with those cards gone.
Yeah, it's very cool, and to see that we're gonna get 4 new heroes, and 2 of them wizards. Wizards notoriously operate on a different axis. We talked about Verdance, we talked about Acilio, and this could be the return of Runeblade, and that's why I really wanted to talk to you, Charles. Florian.
Yeah,
Looking to be like the version of Briar that you won nationals with. Not verbatim, obviously. It's a little bit different, but it's the grindy Earth version of Runeblade. What are your thoughts? Is this going to be the premier, not fatigue deck, but like maybe something like that? What do you think?
I think Florian definitely has some of the best defensive tools that we've seen in a while. The new Earth React is very powerful, just being an extra red 4 block defense reaction, assuming you're decomposing. The ability to create multiple embodiments of Earth is obviously really powerful. I am curious to see how you're going to build it, because when I was playing Briar, I didn't need to play Earth cards, right? I could just play the red attacks that attacked for 7, and I could play 3 block non-attack actions as my blues, and every other slot that I wanted. Which those are like the best things to block with an embodiment of Earth. Unfortunately, there's going to be this tension between like, hey, how many Earth cards do you need, especially in the blues of your deck, and then how many things that can just be like 3 block non-attack actions like you want for embodiments. That'll be interesting deck building, but I do think Florian definitely has the tools to do that, and has lots of value when it kind of is online and is chugging along.
Yeah, and then you look at the other kind of token it's going to create a lot of rune chants. We've already seen a lot of the OTK Viscerize running around. They think they're good. They end up not being that great, but Florian has Mordred on a stick, right? So that's a real consideration here for that deck, and they've even mentioned it in articles like Florian OTK. Like I think in the ban article there was a mention of Florian OTK. Do you think that's probably where his true strength will kind of end up settling? Because it's very powerful. I mean, when OTK rune chants go off, it's very hard to beat that if it's done correctly.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. Definitely, that hero power is so impactful on rune chants, and just being able to make like 1 rune chant at a time, which doubles up to 2 through some of the various aura effects that exist to make a rune chant 3 times, right? Over time. Those are obviously like crazy good with Florian. And as you said, there's not a lot of counterplay once they actually have that many rune chants, right? There's not a lot you can do, to stop the combo once it's there. There's some disruption you can do beforehand, and you can try to aggro them down while they're trying to set up. So there is counterplay, and that's kind of why we haven't seen Viscerai really take off in that realm. But it's certainly something I'm interested to try on Florian. And I think maybe the defensive embodiments of Earth is just kind of like how Florian survives to that point, right? And it's not the end all be all of like, hey, I'm going to fatigue you out through lots of value. It's just getting double embodiment is great, for whatever value you're trying to get.
Yeah, and it's almost as if Florian wants you to try to like attack him while he's setting up, because you need to fill your graveyard, because you theoretically only need 3 decomposes for CC. Right. 3 earth, 2 earth, and then you're cooking. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, the last question I have about Florian here is we do have a new weapon. We talked a lot about Reaping Blade, and we talked some about what the heck is it called? Rosetta Thorn.
Yeah.
Beautiful card. We have Rotwood Reaper. It's basically Romping Club, right? Or is it just not going to be the answer? It's more of a nice limited piece.
I think it is just worse than Nebula Blade in basically every situation. I know obviously there are cases where Rotwood Reaper is better, but like in any realistic scenario, I think I'd rather have Nebula Blade in constructed. So I kind of think this was a little bit of an underpowered weapon that was designed mainly for limited first, which is fine. I do kind of wish they would come back with majestic weapons. They haven't really done that in a very long time. But I liked the idea that you can, have slightly different power levels of weapon, even if they were ultimately kind of similar. I do think that Rotwood Reaper and maybe even Verdant's staff as well are just not what they were intended to play in Classic Constructed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are a little underpowered. Yeah, I like the majestic weapons too. Probably keep them put them in the expansion slot, I guess.
Sure.
Which I guess we do see some of that here and there, like with the daggers sometimes. And then I guess new Moneris, whatever it was called. But
the Luminaris Angel Glow,
yeah. Illusionist, who needs them? But it's
not me.
Yeah, no, not me either. But yeah, it should be interesting to see how Florian shapes up. Now, I do got to ask, out of the 4 heroes, who do you think is going to be the real business? Because we didn't even talk about Aurora, because Aurora is looking to be quite the premier aggro deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Aurora is probably one of the more straightforward of the 4 new heroes, and that's nothing to say about her power level or anything. I just think, we've seen Lightning Runeblade before, right? You play your go again attacks, you swing your weapon where you can. It feels like it's a deck that, I don't want to say builds itself, but like you can very easily picture how it's going to operate and compare it to past aggro decks, whether it be Ninja or Runeblades of the past. And I think we can kind of envision. I think it's going to be Aurora is going to be at worst just a solid deck. It's not gonna be terrible like some other heroes we've seen. And maybe it is a top tier deck. It's just a little too early for me to say. That being said, I think Aurora has a good chance of being that consistently good deck. I think that Auxilio has the highest ceiling.
Yeah.
But the lowest floor.
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe the Auxilio deck is really good and somebody finds the right formula and, it's top of the meta, and maybe they don't, and it's kind of terrible. But if there's ever going to be like a, meta breaker best deck, kind of like we saw with Zen, my bet would be on Auxilio out of any of them.
Interesting.
And then, just because it's so weird, how could it be such a weird hero and not be good? I don't know. I've said that before about other heroes like Olympia, and it wasn't good. So maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, Auxilio is one of those ones that I think. So not to like dunk on Kano or whatever, but when Kano's doing the Kano thing, we've seen it a million times. It's not that exciting anymore. It's just like, all right, get it over with. To me, from what I've seen from Auxilio, it's going to be one of those things like a glass cannon, right? Like this better work, right? Rather than this kind of calculated thing that we see with Kano, which can falter sometimes as well. But Auxilio has that point or that potential to be, this is really, really cool when it happens. Yeah. It's not going to happen that often. So, we'll see with Auxilio. And then Florian and Verdant's just like solid decks, you think, or maybe play second fiddle to the other Runeblades and Wizards?
I think it depends on how strong this like OTK Florian actually turns out to be, right? Historically, we've seen that with OTK Viscerai, that it's, I think they don't, put on my developer hat and the game designer hat. I don't think you want that kind of deck to be the de facto best deck of the meta. For a couple of reasons. Like, you want it's okay for it to be present and be like, a viable choice. But if that's ever like the best deck, it leads to a lot of like play patterns that I think they don't really want to support. It's these OTK setup decks aren't attacking back and forth. They're just trying to play their own cards. They're trying to, be defensive. They're not like, you're trying to build up a bunch of rune chants, which by definition means you can't really be attacking because then you'd pop them all early. And I just think that is not the way that they really want Flesh and Blood to be played. And I agree. I think it's fine for one deck to do that. But when it's the best deck and the most popular deck, I think the overall quality of the game, or like the experience for the average player, is diminished. So I'd hope that these kind of OTK combo decks are not the best deck. But that's maybe a bit of insider baseball on what how I would view it as a developer.
Yeah, it would be tough, I think, for it to be the best deck, so I'm not sure, but yeah, I agree, because it can be miserable, like, especially for a newer player who comes and plays against that, and there's like, oh, so maybe I shouldn't try to kill my opponent? Like, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah, it leads to really weird, like, well, we also saw this with Zen, right? Where sometimes the correct play into Zen was to not attack them, because then they get to pop Traverse, they get to pop their boots, they get to do all the craziness. And like, hey, I've got one attack. Maybe you just pass, right? Like, maybe that's actually the winning play into Zen. And I think that was one of the big strikes against him, was this really anti-fun way of playing, where it's like, I have a card, it's an attack, I should attack with it. And now suddenly that becomes the wrong choice. I think rubbed people the wrong way. And that was a big strike against that, and might be against this kind of OTK style deck that wants to fill up their graveyard to decompose.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm hoping for the mid range kind of more control.
Yeah, same.
Play those kind of the Plow Under, and then the other one, the 3 for 8.
Yeah, Felling the Crown. Yeah, those cards are great. Like, they are great on the rate, and I think they'll see play no matter what build of the deck. I think every Florian and Verdance deck probably starts with 3 of each of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we do have some listener questions from the Buds out there. You can submit listener questions in the Buds Discord. It's in the show notes below. Open for anyone to join. First one comes from Capolo. We covered a little bit of a couple of these questions, but Capolo asked, what makes you more aligned to fatigue strategies in Fab?
Yeah, just to kind of rehash what I said before, I like winning. It's my favorite thing to do in a game of Flesh and Blood is to check the I-1 box on Gem at the end. And turns out fatigue decks win a lot, or at least they work for me, because I felt like I was able to get good edges over opponents and just had better game plan. And the onus was often on the opponent to find a way to beat me, and I didn't need to find a way to beat them. My deck would just beat them if they couldn't figure it out. And oftentimes they didn't, so I won a lot with them.
Amen. Sigma asks, between Verdance and Florian, which one holds the potential to be the new fatigue deck?
Ooh, I think neither of them are going to be the true fatigue deck that we saw with things like Ultim or Fatigue Briar, where I literally run you out of cards and then swing my weapon over and over again to kill you, because, well, one, Verdance is arcane damage weapons, so that doesn't really work because they can just pitch to AB and then you never run them out of cards. And Florian kind of has some of the defensive problems we talked about with the embodiments of Earth and Earth cards kind of playing at odds. But I do think both of them can be a pretty good defensive deck that sets up to some win condition, which is kind of Fatigue by a different name. It just happens to be, maybe that win condition is a Mountain of Rune Chance. Maybe that win condition is some kind of life gain, rampant growth combo. But you kind of need to play that defensive game plan that, hold back and establish the, contain their aggression, establish your win condition, and then finally actually win the game.
Absolutely. Orc Knight, aka Jesse Harper, asks, what is the most important skill/heuristic from a macro level that players should have, and what would you do to improve this if you were an enfranchised player looking to take your skill set to the next level?
Yeah, I think the most important skill for any kind of enfranchised player who's probably playing at RTN levels or ProQuest levels, and really wants to take it up to that next level and be more consistently winning those or doing well at callings or other higher level events, is really just sitting down and understanding your deck and the game plans into different matchups. It's not always just like, oh, I'm just going to play my cards and see where they lie. It's not always about finding the value on this turn cycle or the value of this hand or whatever. It's often about just like, having a more established game plan, and thinking about like what matters, like what should I be arsenaling, what card should I be saving, when is it important to block, when is it important to push aggressively into them, and knowing kind of how your opponent wants to play, and then not letting them do that. Right? If your opponent wants to play with 5-card hands, we'll throw disruption at them. Like maybe you need to adjust your game plan to make sure you're disrupting them every turn. If they want to play small card hands, well, like maybe don't let them play don't attack them as often. Like set up the bigger turns, and just kind of thinking about the matchup more on a holistic level, about like what both decks want to do is the most important skill. And it's hard to do because there's no like guidebook out there, and even like people who write guides for different decks, this is a level of detail that often is hard to communicate without like good practice and good just reps into it. So it kind of comes with just repetition into the matchup and like critically thinking about like what happened there, like what went wrong, why did I win, why did I lose, and hopefully from that you can kind of figure out those kind of game plans and strategies.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't chalk up everything to a high roll or a low roll, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be something that happened. Not all the time, I guess.
Well, there are high rolls and low rolls, but like you can't change that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't say like, oh, well, I'll just get luckier next time. I mean, I can say that. That doesn't do anything, right? So like you have to say, okay, like yeah, maybe they high rolled me and I got, I had a little bit of a low roll, but what could I have done differently? Maybe I can build my deck so that I high roll more often, right? Maybe maybe you low rolled, but really you just don't have enough blues, right? And you just drew all red hands. Maybe you just need more blues in your deck to improve the consistency. So even then, there's something to look at and think on a more macro level about what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Next one's a Diablo question, I believe, from Pat Shaw. What is your favorite part of the Vessel of Hatred expansion pack beyond the new class?
Yeah, so shameless plug, Vessel of Hatred expansions launching next month for Diablo 4. I obviously work pretty heavily on it. I think the part that I'm most excited is just every class is getting new skills that they can use. They've got awesome new animations, new VFX. Obviously, it makes a whole lot of new builds that you can build around them and just kind of make a character that uses these new skills in a lot of cool ways. I think it really just adds a lot of variety to it, and so I'm really looking forward to playing those. In addition to the new class, which obviously has all new skills because it's a brand new class, brand new to Diablo, the Spiritborn.
Very cool, very cool. Darth Prentice asks, "What's your favorite book you've read in the past 5 years? Are you a big reader?"
I do read occasionally. Yeah, I don't. I actually think I'm a little bit of a slow reader. Like if you literally just put a book down in front of me and like told me to read every word of it, like I'd probably be very slow compared to your average reader to finish it. So I end up like listening to a lot of podcasts and watching a lot of videos that are kind of, they're not reading adjacent, but like they're often informational or like educational, or like thought provoking in a lot of ways. So I kind of get that through that medium instead. I'm just more auditory rather than directly reading. All this is to buy time as I'm thinking back through the books I did read in the past 5 years.
Here's the thing: you're a slow reader because you want to get the most time reading the book, just like you get
that's
the most time.
That's the one. No, I think it also ends up being that I really want to make sure I absorb every last little bit of it, and so I'll often end up like reading paragraphs multiple times. Like I'll read through it once, and I'm just like, let me read that again, and just like make sure I really get it. So that contributes to it a bit. But I did think of one. It was about 5 years ago, actually, exactly. So kind of right on that limit. It was called The Happiness Advantage, and it was kind of a I struggle. I hesitate to use this, but like really kind of transformational to my mindset on like how to approach life in general. And I think if you ask a lot of people like an adjective to describe me, like I'm generally a very happy person. Like like it's rare to find me in a bad mood. It sometimes after losing tournaments I am, but other than that, I'm generally in a pretty good mood. And so what the book was kind of advocating for was not just that like happiness should be a goal of yours, like, oh, I want to, do X, Y, and Z, and then I'll be happy. It's more like if you establish happiness as like part of your life and like a mindset that actively, pursues happiness, like that's actually competitively advantageous in a lot of ways. Not just card competitive, but just like life, like getting a better job or just being, living a better life. And whatever kind of endeavors you want, if you approach it with like a happier mindset, you know, happier people are just better at what they do, whatever that doing might be or might entail. Uh, and so that kind of spoke to my competitive mindset of like, ooh, I want to get better, so I'm going to be happier. And it's like, it sounds weird when you put it like that. But I have found a lot of value in that, and I think it's been really impactful in my life. And it was about 5 years ago that I did that, and I feel like the last 5 years of my life have been pretty good.
Well, that's awesome. I think and you are a happy person. Certainly, we could all tell. Everybody who just listened to this past hour,
Yeah.
obviously. And one last question comes from Smithel, who asks, "What do you miss from your time living in Pittsburgh?"
Oh, yeah. So I moved out here I currently living in California for my job at Blizzard. I moved out here a little over a year ago. Used to live in Pittsburgh and lived in Pittsburgh for most of my life. I miss the Pittsburgh Steelers, just being the hometown team, right? I love my Steelers. I love my Pittsburgh sports, and you do actually see some people rocking a Steelers shirt or Steelers license plate every once in a while around here, more than you'd expect. Steelers fans travel well, but just kind of miss it just being everywhere all the time. And so I'm doing my little part to hopefully win over some Steelers converts around here by wearing my gear and all that stuff. Now that football season has started up again.
Well, you guys started 1-0 with a lot of field
we
goals.
Sure did.
Hey, listen, a W's a W.
That is the Steeler way. Like so my buddy Pat, we were at the premiere whenever that happened, and I showed him the score, and we both were just like hell yeah! Like if you don't love that, you don't like Steelers football. Like defense wins championships, 6 field goals, we take that every day. Like we are the happiest fan base to win by 6 field goals. Like nothing makes us happier, honestly.
I mean, it is pretty sick. I mean, whenever that happens, Boswell is getting some serious reps. So, very cool. Well, Charles, thank you so much for coming on. You've been an absolute wonder. You're such a good dude and a great player. So it was really great to get a chance to talk to you. Can you please plug anything you'd like to plug? And thank you again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really do too much content. I am on Twitter at tinman354. Also on Discord, I tend to try to answer as much as I can when people ask me stuff on either one. But I don't necessarily make any new content because I'm just so busy with work and Flesh and Blood as is. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for me. That's where you can find me.
Cool. Awesome. You all can continue to find me on Twitter at freshbudspod. Check out the Buds Discord. If you watch on YouTube, give it the old like, comment, subscribe. And Fresh Juice, an indie game podcast I do with my cousin. Check that out as well. And finally, Charles, I always like to end every episode talking a little bit about food. What's some food that you want to tell the world about?
Ooh, some delicious food. So when we traveled to Barcelona last year for Worlds, I actually took an extra week afterwards and went to Greece with my sister. We went to Athens, Greece, to see a bunch of the ancient Greek stuff there. And let me tell you, I love Greek food.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the like everything about it. I can't even, name any particular dish there, but just like all of it was so amazing. Um, I love the everything about it. We actually took a Greek cooking class when we were
Oh.
there. So there was like, somebody who's authentic Greek chef, and they, we prepared like a traditional Greek dinner, like 5 or 6 course or 7 course dinner with all the different stuff. And that was really awesome. They've got a little cookbook, and one of these days I will make that same thing here in America, with all the like wrapped olive wrapped olive leaves and the cooked lamb and everything. That was really awesome.
Yeah. And to get some engagement going in the comments, I think Greek food is way better than Italian food. So do
Ooh.
with that what you will, folks. Come at me, tweet me, whatever. And with that, we don't have time for Charmer, but we'll get to him eventually. Thank you all. Please stay fresh.